All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Shape the Trainer session on giving and receiving, and I would argue receiving and giving feedback in meaningful ways. I could not be more thrilled to be here with Dr. Kyle Oldham, who started us off with Shape the Trainer on Tuesday and then now is joining us and ending again. My name is Emily. For those of you I don't know, I have the opportunity of working in training and talent development in the Laurie Student Center. My pronouns are she and hers, and I jump at every opportunity to be in space and facilitation with Kyle. So really glad that so many of you are here with us. Kyle, take it away.
Hi, name's Kyle Oldham, pronouns he, him, his. Work in housing and dining services, and I always jump in at the opportunity to work with Emily and be in community with others, but mainly it's Emily because she is the light of my life. And so we're excited to be here with you all this afternoon, and we promise that the 3 hours will fly by. It'll be like we teleported to 4 o'clock, and then you're just going to be so worn out that you're going to say, I have to go. I can't spend the last 45 minutes here working. So that's exactly what's going to have to happen over these next 3 hours now. So we're going to really wish that we could be in person, because then we could go around the room and really feel each other's energy and be able to be in space with each other. But because we are still in Zoom after 15 months, we really want to have you introduce yourselves into the space utilizing the chat function. So please find your chat button. Share with us your name if it is not apparent from your Zoom handle. Please choose to share your pronouns if you choose to do so. And then one word you associate with feedback. So we're going to give folks about 65 seconds-ish to find your keyboards and add that into the chat and push that wonderful enter button. Looks like we see necessary, radical candor, care, constructive, essential, growth, opportunity. I feel like I'm reading a sentence here and not just actual random words that are separated. Challenging, layered, feedback is hard, caring, learning, growth, building, absolutely. Challenging with an exclamation point. Jill's like, not just challenging, it's challenging. That's how I feel like the exclamation point changes with the tone. Other folks that aren't on email or randomly just walking around at the moment. Learning. Cool. Thank you all for participating.
So we want to invite a couple folks off of mute and say, tell us what brought you here. Why is feedback necessary for the work that you do? Why did you commit 3 hours to being here with us? So we'd love to hear from at least 3 people.
I am.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Kyle. For me, honing my skills, because it's so easy to get caught in a rut and do the same old. I want to put more tools in my toolbox and make that feedback that I give even better.
Thanks, Nancy. Graham.
Basically, as a supervisor and whatnot, I'm trying to lean more into coaching. So let me say, as a coach and supervisor, I'm trying to own it, is that, I would like to not only mentor my employees in receiving feedback, but, giving me feedback and empowering them to do that. So this is really important for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Caleb, you're off mute. I don't want to assume, but can you join us? Oh, there we go. All right. Anyone else?
Should be frequent and direct, should help us learn and grow. Absolutely, Sonia.
All right.
Cool. All right.
Okay, well, we will continue on and invite your participation in a variety of ways. And, just as important as learning how to give constructive feedback is the skills of receiving feedback. because in the receiving of feedback, we can unintendedly perpetuate microaggressions like we talked about in the last session. We can do a variety of things. And so being able to really build what we need to in terms of skills is really important. I appreciated that, I think it was Jeff who put in the chat care as the word. And I think that can be taken in a couple of ways, right? I see care as someone cares enough to give me feedback, because it is emotional, it's taxing for some people. And so we really want to accept that gift of awareness that we didn't have before, as well as the care in considering how it can be given. So we'll talk about both during this time. So next, we're going to do a little bit of logistics in terms of Know Your Platform. I think everyone here has been with us with at least one session. If you have not, welcome. We do have a button at the bottom of the screen for subtitles. So if you need captions, that is available to you. Apologies for not saying it beforehand. But that's provided by rev.com. We love reaction buttons. We love utilizing the chat, because Kyle and I are both here co-facilitating. We can just look and monitor it a little bit differently. And so we will incorporate as many voices as possible, and will encourage us to all say hello. Let's practice that one time. If you are in a place where you can unmute yourself, I'm looking for a cacophony of hellos. So come off mute.
Hello.
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 Fantastic. Thank you. So we've all done it once. So now it won't be as scary, hopefully, the next time. Next. As with the workshops that have led up to this, and specifically centering feedback, we believe that this is an embodiment of the behavior of our principles of community. That inclusion, integrity, respect, service, and social justice are just words and definitions that exist on the third level of our Laurie Student Center, but are up to us, their community members, to be enacted every day. And each one of us has an individual and collective responsibility to create the community that we want to be a part of, and that others want to be a part of too. So that is how we hope that the content will support our principles of community, and we will continue talking about them throughout the workshop.
So our workshop today, we're going to give you a little taster, I guess, of what we hope that you walk away with, is that you'll be able to identify the impact of socialization, both personally and systemically, on giving and receiving feedback. Again, with that emphasis on receiving, right? Because we're so quick to talk, we don't always want to listen. And so how do we really think about both of those ways? Develop an approach to give feedback. So hopefully you'll be able to reflect a little bit on what your approach is on giving feedback. Understand the concept and impact of trust on feedback. So we're going to talk about trust a little bit. That's the big T word for today. And then develop an approach to monitor the reception of feedback. So how do we really think about all the tools and resources we provide to you that you'll then be able to shape this for yourself? We are not going to be the holders and keepers of step 1, step 2, step 3, because it looks different for all of us in some different ways, but just know that we're going to provide you resources and tools, some information, some ideas, some frameworks, some concepts, some questions, some opportunity to engage one another, so that you can really develop some of these pieces of feedback for yourself. The one other piece that I want to just make sure that we continually, that we make mindful of for ourselves, as well as for everyone here, is that we might not all be connected in on the same platform into this Zoom experience. And so therefore, even with Emily and I just role modeling how to do chat and utilize the chat, not everyone actually has the easiest capability to put things into the chat as well. So if we find ourselves in spaces with folks who don't have the capacity to type things into the chat, or the ability to do so in a manner that might not be conducive of time restraints, please make sure that we're trying different avenues to continue to engage each other in this space. And Emily and I will continue to adjust that as well. Anything to add, Emily? Cool.
So you can just pop all these up there, Kyle. So having to do with the community guidelines, you know, this is part of training, is to set a groundwork and hopes and expectations for the time together. And that is one thing that also builds trust. If we come to a place where we have similar hopes and expectations, then we can know how we're moving forward together. So that comes with a hope that we will all respect and maintain confidentiality. Sometimes that is worded as what's learned leaves, but what's shared stays. So we're going to have 1 or 2 opportunities for you to do a parent share or a breakout. And if stories are shared in those, and I know Kyle and I will share stories, the details of those shared stories we ask to be kept here. This is being recorded, actually. So consensually, Kyle and I are going to offer what we consent to on the recording. But in those breakout rooms, they are not recorded. And so the things that are shared there, please consider that. And my goodness, if you learn learning nuggets, take those away. Please participate in active listening and be respectful when doing so. And then when offering your experiences, please speak from I, using I statements to share thoughts and feelings. And here's the deal. We know that this is a good amount of time that we are asking you to commit to this. We understand that there is an investment that you have already made. There's 24 of us here. That's amazing. And Kyle and I have put in the work. We will continue to bring the energy, bring it to you. we'll do whatever we can to encourage and engage you, but you need to meet us 50 as well. We would love for you to be as present as possible. We know that some things are distracting and that can be okay, but as much as you can, re-engage with us and give us that fair due. So if others have ones, feel free to put it in the chat, guidelines that you need to be participative in this space. Otherwise, we will move on.
Yeah, I felt like that distraction comment was focused at me, and I'm going to take it.
It wasn't. Kyle, do you need any other guidelines for us?
I felt it. No, it's all about it. I'm here for it. Cool. So we also want to do some further logistics and housekeeping items, I guess, in some ways to set up this space. And so we're going to name some assumptions as to how we're entering, because with every training session, no matter how much time we get, we have to operate from some baseline understanding. And so we're going to invite you in at a baseline of what we are hopefully just making some assumptions with. And even if that assumption doesn't resonate with you because you feel like you're not there, it's okay. That's where we invite you to listen actively and respectfully, and also to engage with that participation of that 50-50. So some of the things that we hope for is that we expect and accept the lack of closure. It's an assumption. At the end of today, there will not be a checklist that you can have on your wall that says, oops, I did it. I got my give and my receive down. I have a certificate that says I'm golden. There's no closure at the end of this. It's going to be ongoing, and it has to be ongoing. And that is because supporting people is hard, right? It's hard. I think a friend from the chat room even said, feedback is hard, right? I think that's what it was. Yes. And so supporting people is hard because feedback involves people. Support looks different to and for different people, right? So the way it looks to people is different, and the way that it is provided for people is different. And so we need to understand the complexities of holding those tensions, that we're going to come in with that assumption that we're going to say something and you're going to be like, but wait a minute. And hopefully you say, but wait a minute, to yourself or out loud, whatever, and that you get to insert the blank with what's coming up for you, because we can always find those one-offs and we can always say, well, for me, it would be this. Absolutely, because it looks and feels different for all of us. One-on-one relationships matter and will be the focus. So that trust piece that we're going to talk about is to be a part of this, and relationships will help with feedback situations. So know that you'll hear us bring that into the space in different ways. Employee development takes time, right? If you are the person responsible for other people's development, it takes time. You are responsible for your own development, and it takes time. At the end of 3 hours, you might still not feel 100% confident with giving or receiving feedback, and that's okay. Racism and oppressive environments exist and impact people in relationships. Let's just call that out. It's true. And it's going to impact how we do feedback, how we see feedback, how we receive feedback, how we even listen to what's happening, right? And when we talk about the oppressive environments, let's talk about the complexity of diversity and identities. How you hear me has been scientifically proven that how you will hear Emily is different. And not only how you hear us, but actually how your brain chemistry is made up will actually have you, how you hear us will actually be how you believe us differently as well, because of our gender identity differences. So just know that this bias plays into this space. And while this is not a session on bias, and you may not have gone to the session on microaggressions, and you may not have gone to the session on facilitating across difference and addressing important topics, when you watch them videos, you're gonna have that light bulb go off like, oh, that's what he was saying. So just know that it's an assumption we're walking into this space with as well. And that trauma could shift and change all of this knowledge situationally, both past and current, right? We might talk about something and it might shift on its head because of a experience, a word, a phrase, a memory, anything that might bring truth to your story might come up and shift how this knowledge is utilized and how it can be transformative for you in different spaces. So we are operating under these assumptions together. We invite you to be on this journey with us in these assumptions. And even if some of these assumptions are like, I still don't get it, that's perfectly fine as well. But we're entering in knowing that all of these things exist for us. And whether you have experience with it or not, it is going to be a part of how you receive today's information. Yep, pun on words, receiving, and how we give this information to you. Yes, pun number 2 in the same sentence. Emily, anything to add?
That's great.
Okay. Last but not least, whether we think it is true or not, time is a social construct and nonlinear, but in the construct of socialization that we are operating under today, we have 3 hours, actually 2.5 hours and 9 extra minutes. It's a little bit of time and we have a lot of content. So we're going to do our best on this journey, and we're also going to do it to hopefully leave you with more questions and an invitation at the end.
So when we're talking about feedback, my journey and relationship with feedback has been a lot about stamina building. Assessing and building our stamina to be in conversations that might feel a little funky, might get us sweating a little bit on our palms or under our arms or wherever. That is really important to notice. So we're going to be talking about the societal, the psychological, the actionable, all of that in order to build our feedback. The skills that are necessary to not only give feedback, but to receive feedback are that which we need to address. Because this concept of stamina, as it relates to different work, I first heard it coming from the work of Dr. Robin DiAngelo, where she talks about white fragility. And while that is a really necessary concept for those of us who may be white, who may be participating in anti-racist work, to have the concept around, and there are those of us who absolutely have fragility when receiving feedback, what an asset-based or a positive way of thinking of it is, how are we building our stamina? How are we encouraging and building our psychological muscles to have that strength to be in these conversations, to show and demonstrate trust and community building, so that we can continue to create an environment that continues to work towards inclusion, towards equity, and towards social justice. So this will be one of the frameworks, how we talk about it through today. Anything else, Kyle, you'd add? Okay. Okay. So let's pop them all up. I was all cute and put all of these all of these things in there, but I just want to see them all at once. Because when you see this at once, the framework that you may have heard, if it's new to you, that's wonderful. The framework that CSU, that the Vice President for Diversity Office, that a number of entities work from, is the multicultural competence model. So that means that through awareness, building our awareness, understanding the environments around us and the environment that's going on within us to build a better understanding will lead us towards becoming multiculturally competent. Not just awareness, because sometimes when we become aware of things, we want to jump to action, and that can create harm. So taking the time to go to trainings like this, watch YouTube videos, have conversations with people who are different than you, read some history books that have not been written through the lens of only Western European, right? Increasing your knowledge around that in order to work towards building skills are absolutely the commitments that we need to make to better have a grasp of how to do this together. The skills that we're going to talk about absolutely are within this multicultural competence model. And these skills will prepare us to be in action, right? So that Kyle and I, if Kyle has feedback for me, which we'll demonstrate a scenario later on today, that I have the ability and can grasp into these skills and practice some of them to be in that action which works towards transformation. We said in our assumptions, we're going to center the one-on-one relationships because it is a number of the one-on-one relationships that build sense of belonging or retention within our jobs, within our schooling, within all of that. And if we build that, if we transform our environments towards more of a anti-oppressive, anti-racist, socially just institution, we are the better for it. And transformation can be hard. It comes with some growing pains, if you will. And that's what we're working towards today. Kyle, would you add anything? Okay.
Not at the moment.
Let us know if you have any questions. Use that hand raise function or the chat.
So just to start off with some knowledge pieces, we're gonna share this piece of feedback as a definition from what we are framing a lot of our talk around, is that feedback is for the benefit of the receiver. Let me say it again for the people in the back. Feedback is for the benefit of the receiver, right? Its purpose is to help them grow and develop and reinforce positive behavior or actions. It is designed to help and support and focuses on how to learn from the situation in order to move forward. When we hear this, think about when we give feedback and when we receive feedback. And we'll get into some more technical definitions in just a second here, but this is the framing for what we're moving forward with, right? That as we are engaging, whether we are giving or receiving feedback, we need to ensure that we are focusing on the right things, and that it's for the benefit of the growth, the learning, the focus, and to be able to move forward for the person who's receiving the feedback. It's not a chance for us to clear our ledger and clear our mind of all the things that we want to say. And so if we are able to understand that, maybe it can help us reframe and reshape the ways in which we hear feedback from others, and hopefully the way in which we shape feedback for others as well. And it's part of that employee development and that supporting people parts of being hard and that it takes time, that we can't always just jump into that space. So know that this is the definition we're operating from, and we'll continue to hopefully call back into spaces around it's for the benefit of the receiver. So we broke this down into sort of 3 sections today. This might not be the right PowerPoint, Emily.
I think you just have to click it through.
Oh, yes, maybe so. I don't know. I didn't know there's animation. That's fine. I was looking like, there's 2 different PowerPoints. Oh, no. So those are moments of facilitation where they get hard. You just have to mess up. So we're going to talk about some of those frameworks of how we're learning our stuff today. In our first section, we're really going to focus on self and trust, right? And so we're not going to really get into the how-to of feedback in section 1. We really want to talk about what shapes our relationship to feedback, because there are multiple elements and experiences and ways in which we have been conditioned that will shape how we give and how we receive feedback. And so in section 1, we're going to talk a little bit about self and trust. And we're going to start off a little bit around this concept of socialization. For those of you that want to unmute or raise hands, we will call on that. For those of you that want to type it in the chat, feel free to do so as well. But we really want to ask, what is socialization to you? What does it mean? What do you think it is? Kyle. But if I don't say anything, you'll answer our own questions. Okay, Fran, how our culture programs us with expectations. Absolutely, Fran. Thank you for getting us started. Lakshmi?
Yeah, I think it's all the messages that we get across our lives that kind of show us what is our role, like how are we supposed to act and be and do.
Absolutely. Looks like Rachel's on the same train of thought with learned behaviors, ideas, and perceptions. Cami saying the social norms we are all expected to adhere to. Pamela says, what I've been taught in the world that I've lived in. You better speak them I statements into existence into your chat. Absolutely. All of us are on the right page. That it's these expectations, these norms, these learned behaviors, sometimes reinforced, actually not even sometimes, all the times reinforced behaviors that get us to think that we're supposed to operate in one way. Bobby Harrow introduces this concept of the cycle of socialization and how it's impacted by culture through these 5-stage model. And really at the center of it is fear, confusion, ignorance, and I believe there's one more, and fear, confusion, ignorance, and there's one more that's escaping my mind. But that it's these emotions that guide us into this, that keep us in this socialization, but also guide us through it. And that we're born blank slates, and that through our birth, it's our family that socializes us, or those around us in close communities that socialize us with values and rules and roles and rituals. And then we are then moved into some spaces as we get older and we start interacting more with the outside world around us. We're bombarded with messages that are either institutional or cultural, such as media, news, businesses, church, school, that there's these things that then teach us how we're supposed to act based upon who we are. And we are then, we realize that we test the waters in different ways based upon these messages through punishment and reward, right? So some things are reinforced. So if you do a certain thing that society or that those in your community want you to do, it's reinforced with rewards, right? And so, or if you're doing something that's stepping outside of the box and being your own individual person, which is funny how we tell ourselves to grow up to be individuals, but then we're not told to be individuals through our actions and behaviors, then you might be punished. You might be stigmatized or discriminated against, right? So if you think about growing up, I know in my family, I was sent strong messages that as a young boy, I don't wear pink. I shouldn't play with dolls. Hopscotch was on the borderline because it wasn't a masculine enough sport, but it was still active in some ways. So it depending upon who was in the vicinity, I was allowed to play hopscotch with my cousins because I grew up with mainly female identified cousins, right? So it really, those messages were reinforced for me. If I wore pink, I was made fun of, words were said about me. So those punishments and discriminations and stigmas were attached, right? And again, it's all centered in this fear, confusion, and ignorance of the unknown in some ways. And then it's carried into our adulthood and we start doing more around silence and collusion or ignorance or guilt, dehumanization, horizontal oppression. We do it back to others to make sure that they're in alignment with what messages were being sent. And if you miss that message, we will be quick to remind you of those messages. And then ultimately, because it fits, because it's the status quo, because we have messages like if it's not broke, don't fix it, we just pass it on to the next folks. So as parents, as older siblings, as uncles and aunties, as play cousins and them, as supervisors, whatever role we find ourselves in, we then perpetuate these same messages back onto others. So if you think about in the workplace, those of us who have worked around, whether it's CSU or not, those of us who have worked in a certain office longer than others, we onboard people in ways and we teach them those informal ways of this is how you get things done. Here's what the policies are. Here's what you shouldn't say. Here's what you should say. And then you start seeing it replicating itself even in our workplaces through acts of socialization. Questions, thoughts, reactions, clarification points around the concept of socialization? Our hope is that in between that adulthood and that carrying out to the next generation and promoting the status quo, that we can start recognizing those shifts unlearning, dismantling, and doing some things differently that will allow us to move into a liberatory consciousness, that we can liberate our actions, our behaviors, our attitudes in a way that sort of challenges the status quo. And we know that that's hard because it's a system, it's an organization, which are meant to stay in rigid structure ways, right? And so we also get messages around those, that if we step outside the box, that we might not do what we're supposed to do. So just know that this is at the basis of how we have been brought up within the concepts of feedback.
I was just thinking before we go on to that slide around the cycle of socialization, when you were talking about, Kyle, your growing up and the messages you received, I was trying to think where I learned messages of, quote, professionalism. And I don't know if anyone else participated or even heard about, like, take your daughter to work day. I feel like, so I'm 36, and I feel like it was this time when we were trying to get more women into the workforce, or, you know, teach our daughters. But I went with my dad to an office setting. I remember very clearly sitting and falling asleep during one of his meetings that was like around the table, and everyone was in suits, and they all looked very similar to each other, and they were all talking in a certain way. Whether I realized it or not, I was getting a lot of messages of what should be in a professional setting, right? And who gets to define who usually is in those spaces. And so all of that has to do with our socialization. And I appreciate what just came in the chat, liberating ourselves from this also helps liberate others. Now, this doesn't mean to say that the ways that I grew up or the areas are bad by any means. It's to build our awareness around how we were socialized and not vindicate or overly judge unnecessarily people who do not fit into our default, right? People who do not fit into the ways we were socialized or raised. That leads really well into our next set in terms of professionalism, et cetera. So one of the cultures that all of us in this room, all 24 of us, have been exposed to, and I say that with confidence because of Colorado State University, right? Because of the environment that we live in, regardless of if we might live in different neighborhoods, we might live in, we might have been raised in different countries, we might have and hold different identities, but because we are in CSU, there is a culture around us that has been set up under some certain expectations. And these align with white supremacy culture. Now, you might think lots of things, right? For the folks who are like, white supremacy culture, what? I don't have a hat. I don't live in certain states. Don't come at me talking to me that I'm a white supremacist, right? White supremacist and white supremacy culture are two different things. I want to say that again. White supremacist and white supremacy culture are two different things. The culture that upholds or that looks and sees whiteness as supreme, and sometimes it can be really hard. What are you talking about? Like the aspects of white culture. But we're going to talk about some of those concepts as it relates to feedback. So when Kyle and I were looking at feedback and the shoulds and should nots, both of giving and receiving, first of all, I don't know about you, if you're white, but I didn't get a lot of feedback unless it was really positive. And then the other stuff was just kind of like whispered on the side, right? Like hard conversations didn't often happen, and parenting looked really different. But I grew up, it could be my racial socialization, my gender socialization, and a variety of things. So it's not only race potentially, but the concepts of perfectionism and the expectation that goes with being perfect, never messing up. Constantly when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, people are like, I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to look like a fool. I don't want to do this, because we have these expectations of perfectionism. We do not give a lot of generosity to people around that. And because that is an expectation, it makes it very difficult to engage in feedback conversations, right? Defensiveness, this, you know, if Kyle shares something to me and it challenges some of who I am, because I'm going to pop to either or thinking, because to me, I'm either a bad person or a good person. And if you share feedback with me, then I think I'm a bad person. Jay Smooth, hopefully in one of the videos we're going to watch, is going to talk about this, right? That challenging of concept of self is where we have to build our stamina around receiving feedback, because feedback tells us what is important and what is of notice from other people, right? Also, this sense of urgency that we may have we have to do things now, we have to go, we have to get this program done, and that can get in the way of meaningful conversations. There are some times where I want to have a conversation with someone about feedback or send that email or encourage, and I don't feel like I have the time. And so the sense of urgency is a barrier to having some of the conversations that we need. So I just want folks to think about that. Fear of open conflict. I don't know about you. In my household, I don't remember my parents fighting but twice, 2 times, and they both had the word divorce in it, because everything else was this passive aggressive, sweep it under the rug, don't worry about it until it blows up, right? So this fear of open conflict makes me feel like if Kyle and I are gonna go head to head, then he's gonna cut me out. He's gonna check me. And I don't want to lose Kyle, so I don't want to be in conflict. But not being in conflict sometimes, or not being in these conversations, can decrease trust. And that's what we're going to talk about. There's the individualism, the I want to be a good person, and then a right to comfort, right? This idea that, well, everyone needs to feel safe physiologically, personally. And when we're talking about safe, sometimes we're talking about comfort. We want to increase our comfort, and everyone wants to feel comfortable in environments that they are. And some people are going to need feedback conversations to feel more comfortable, right? And it doesn't have to be about comfort, especially when we're in our workspace. We want to be able to work well together, but that expectation of comfort comes from this white supremacy culture. There's a 2.5-hour webinar that we can send you afterwards that dives deeper into white supremacy culture, as well as an article, but really wanted to frame up some of this in starting to think about, hopefully some of us in this room, regardless of our identities, can see or start to consider how this played out within some of the expectations that have been placed upon us. Any questions, thoughts, reactions? Zoom is so hard during this conversation. Kyle, anything you'd add?
Looks like Andy unmuted. Wanted to see if Andy had something to bring into the space. Guess not. Pamela?
Can you hear me? Okay. The thing that I was thinking about, this literally just happened this week. I was trying to give my child some feedback. Teenagers are hard. And I caught myself sounding like my mother. I don't know if that happens to other people. And when the conversation ended, it didn't go well. I thought to myself, like, I cannot believe that I just let that happen. Like, it's like my mother like consumed my body. And I had to go and apologize. And I think that's something that I often think about around feedback, is that sometimes I can have the best like intentions or plan, and it still doesn't go right. And I have to be willing to admit that and to apologize and try to get it right another time. And so, yeah, I would just kind of put that into the space too, around forgiving yourself for getting it wrong and trying to get it right again.
Can I ask Pamela, as a part of that, what was going on for you having to acknowledge that you got it wrong and apologize? Like, what was beneath the surface? Maybe what was going through your mind, potentially?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I could almost like envision my mother giving me the same feedback and how it used to make me feel. And knowing that essentially what that looked like for me was I pretended like I was listening. And I just, went mentally went to a different place. And I almost could see that happening with my own child. And so, there's just things from a socialization standpoint. Oh my God, like it can take years and years and years to try to get some of that out. And for me, it still just like crops back up again. And I really have to catch myself. And what I've noticed is it takes me a while to think about it and then to try to get it right the next time. So I don't necessarily always see it right away. Sometimes I do. This time I did, but man, it's hard to get rid of some of those things, especially that we grew up with, Emily sharing what you did, about parents arguing or whatever. Like, it's been a long time since you lived in a house with your parents, but that's probably still something that's very like real. And I feel that way too.
Yeah. Thank you. Like, it looks like in the chat that someone's like, Nancy said, I hope to be as patient and well-intended as my mother, right? And so when I sound like my mother, I congratulate myself, right? And it can be a both and in a lot of ways, and it's situational, right? Because even though we might sound like those one moments where it takes us back to the moment where we receive feedback that we're like, oh, no, you didn't. In the same vein, there's another opportunity where you were like, oh, I really appreciate when my parents said that to me or operated in that fashion. And I love that, Rachel, you also brought in this concept of it's like that makes you think of the times that you offered feedback that have not been for the benefit of the receiver, but for your own need to vent and peace of mind, et cetera. And so we're going to jump into that, and we'll get you into small groups that allows you to sort of reflect upon that further for everyone. And it's true, right? And it's real that these are the things that we have to think about, because if we switch this over and transfer it in, right, the skill of giving feedback, if we transfer it into the concept of the workplace, that awareness that as supervisors, as leads, as people who have decision-making capabilities, it gets even harder because of some of these perfectionisms, defensiveness, sense of urgencies, fear of conflict, the either or thinking, right? Sometimes plants these seeds in our head that I actually can't be wrong, and I can't acknowledge that I am wrong. Even if I know that I am, I can't acknowledge it because it'll be used against me in my leadership role, that someone's going to then say, well, see, you were wrong then. And so sometimes there's these tensions, these mind bugs, or these self-fulfilling prophecies, or these socialized, internalized thoughts that we hold, that because of our role and positionality, we can't actually say, I don't know, or we can't actually say, I'm sorry. And that's part of receiving feedback and giving feedback, that we need to be able to think from multiple perspectives of what's happening, either in the moment or reflective after the moment, which might require us to revisit the conversation. So
I'm
that
really
was
glad.
coming up for me.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Kyle, because, I've been doing more and more work on the generations that are coming into the workplace. You are so right about that expectations of leaders having all the answers. And as we know more about, I'm gonna drop some language, right? Post-industrial leadership theories, as well as the upcoming generations of millennials, Gen Z, the upcoming alphas, oh my goodness, their expectation is for and giving feedback. It is for and it is expecting that continuum of let's find that together to inspire work together. And that looks very different than the dictatorial models we've known before in some of the traditionalist generations and et cetera. So that's just how a lot of different generations, or a lot of different, identities can play into this work for sure.
Right.
I'm going.
Mm-hmm. So just to add a few more pieces to complex this, some hard truths, right, around the impacts of socialization and white supremacy culture on the concept of feedback, is that the system wasn't designed for the success of people and cultures of color, right? And we can also put a caveat on there around gender identity and expression. We can put a caveat on there for age, religion, socioeconomic status. So really, the system was designed with certain folks in mind to operate a certain way. And then there's that, not necessarily acculturation, but the assimilation into that by coming into the workplace. And I mentioned it earlier, onboarding is an assimilation process. And yet we really value onboarding. I mean, I was just talking about it this morning in a meeting, like, yes, we're going to do some great onboarding, rah, rah, rah. And if we don't pay attention to what onboarding can actually do and be for us to create a culture where folks can acculturate, bringing their own perspectives and mixing it with what's here, and not just leaving everything they know and saying you have to operate as this cog in this wheel. We know that that's where the system gets us to start talking in a specific way and acting in a certain way. There's no history of real healing, right? We continue to push off that a need for healing actually has to occur. And so therefore, ultimately that then means that wrongdoing may have actually happened to begin with. It just is what it is. Oh, that's what that was. Get over it, right? These are words and phrases that we sometimes find ourselves embodying or being told to us through feedback loops, right? And so we need to learn how to center, whether it's healing that resonates with you, or growth or learning or development or forgiveness, whatever words might resonate with you. We might need to find ways to center that in some of our feedback loop processes. We're in a business, right? Whether higher ed is seen as nonprofit or not from your lens, and we know that there's for-profit and nonprofit institutions, we are a business. We have to remain solvent in order to carry out the goals and the expectations that are placed upon us as an institution of higher ed. And by being a business, we know that there are certain expectations and norms that automatically come from socialized thought processes around what a business represents and what it means. We also need to realize that there's a hard truth that poll tax season doesn't end. And when we say that, we can call it multiple different things, but this poll tax on the physical bodies of folks who the system wasn't made for, there's a tax that we have to pay in order to speak up, in order to dismantle, in order to try to be authentically ourselves in our authentic bodies in a space, to go against the norms of perfectionism or defensiveness, or to confront a situation that has some wrongdoing attached to it. There's a tax that we have to pay. And sometimes that tax comes back in the form of retaliation, comes back in the form of silence, and it sometimes can come back in the form of, I would even say, physical comfort, or physical discomfort, right? Stress can play out in different ways. If we choose not to step in and do something about it, now we're carrying this with us. For those of us the system might not have been built for, or for those of us who the system may have been built for, but we want to see it done differently, right? So this is where all of this starts to integrate together. There's a cost with trying to create a safe space, knowing that safe is subjective to multiple different people, because we talked about it in assumptions. It looks different to different people and for different people. To move towards brave spaces where we invite us to be brave, to speak up, to engage, to be our authentic selves. But at the same time, if we don't change part of the informal and formal ways of operating, to create a brave space will actually never happen, because the two of them will be in tension points with one another. And then lastly, there's a cost to each of us individually, from either experiencing it firsthand, experiencing it secondhand, or watching it take place and thinking that it doesn't impact us. That denial also is an impact to us. And then last but not least, it can be rewarding and tough, right? To be in a space to operate from a lens of feedback, to operate from a lens of having this knowledge and having these awareness moments, and wanting to then build our skills to put into action to transform our culture and our communities. To go through that multicultural competency model, to identify issues with socialization and white supremacy culture. There can be some rewarding moments for that, because you can see it on the person's face who's like, thank you. I didn't realize this was even happening to me, or that I was actually doing it myself. And it could also be tough because some of those other mechanisms will kick in around socialized behaviors or white supremacy culture that doesn't allow us to listen and hear. So these are some hard truths as we go through this, that this is what frames our higher ed culture being here at Colorado State University. And it's always easy to say, well, that's them, that's leadership, that's administration. But how do we recognize our own influence strategies and our sphere of influence that we have, that we can change our behaviors? We can change our attitudes. We can change the way we engage with one another and how we see and receive each other, in the sense that we can make our changes work at our level, and that ultimately, hopefully, it will infuse and integrate and impact those larger systems in a different way as well. Anything to add to that, Emily? I got scared for a second that I was frozen, then I realized I hadn't moved. And so I was telling myself to move, and it was scaring me.
I am thinking about this next part. So let's go to this next part. You're probably like, oh my gosh, we're talking about a lot of stuff. It all builds on this concept of feedback, right? So we're going to ask you to participate in a few minutes of critical reflection. And how, Kyle, if it's all right with you, I think we're going to do 2 minutes in silent reflection. And then we're going to break you up into groups of 3. And we're only going to give you about 5 minutes. You might not get through all of these questions. I'm going to also put them in the chat for you. So as we're looking, it's about 1:55. And we want you to think about these 3 questions. How did the people in your environment in which you grew up communicate? What were expectations placed upon you in relation to your identities? And that might be in terms of communication, in terms of feedback. And then finally, how does this relate to your personal feelings towards feedback? So we're going to give you until 58 to reflect. You can click on that Google Doc if you want to put some of your ideas quickly in the chat first. And then we will come back together and put you into groups of 3.
No, Fran, you didn't miss anything. We're just doing personal reflection.
Then you can look to the chat for those prompts and the Google Doc. All right, so we've given you a couple minutes. We are going to, here's how this will work. We're going to send you into breakout rooms for about 6 minutes. There won't be more than 3, but there might be 2. When you come back from the breakout rooms, you'll come to a screen that says take a break. So then we will give you a 5-minute break. So in total, we're going to be around 11 minutes, 6 minutes in the breakout rooms. and then head into a break to come back at about 2:10. Sound good? So if you're like, what do we talk about? Those prompts that we had you reflecting on. So offer what you feel comfortable sharing, maybe push yourself a little bit to those rooms, and Kyle and I will be here if you have any questions. We'll see you soon.
Is that what you were hoping for?
Nice.
Okay.
Yes.
Sonia or Nancy, do you all need support with getting into a breakout room? Emily, do you know what rooms they're in to see if there's no one sitting by themselves?
Yeah, I managed it.
Okay.
I just put them in the same one. So Nancy's currently by herself. I'll put her in room 4. I'm not seeing Sonia even at her desk, so.
Right. I don't see her there either.
This feels good. It felt like it was,
Hey,
go, you go. Oh,
mhm.
for folks just joining back from the break, we want you to find the chat. And from your perspective, share, what does trust have to do with this? Mm. Mm. So we're seeing trust makes the feedback more relevant. It's difficult to accept feedback if you do not trust the individual providing it. If trust is established, then it makes the feedback more credible and the receiver more invested in that feedback. Trust makes people more receptive. It impacts how feedback is received. It makes us open to feedback. If you don't trust the person receiving can question, if you don't have trust, the person receiving can question the motive. If the trust isn't there, the conversation might not be very productive. I'm more willing to share feedback if I trust it will be heard and taken seriously. I was reading down and I was like, ooh, there's a trend. There is a theme. It's very much about trust that the receiver has in the giver. And I was waiting for someone to say, if I don't trust that the feedback is going to be received, I might not give that feedback, right? I might not trust that it's going to be heard and taken seriously. So the question, as we're thinking about giving and receiving feedback, what am I doing? What behaviors am I sharing with others that would demonstrate I am open to feedback, right? And then what am I doing to potentially be some of that credible source? And sometimes you can control that and sometimes you can't. But how trust is broken or how trust is built, we'll get into in a little bit. Thank you for those initial responses. So if we go to the next one, we look at a definition of trust. It is the assured reliance on character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. And so when I look at this definition, I go right back to stamina, right? I go right back to the ability to believe that someone can be in this tough conversation with me. One in which confidence is placed, right? That it will be received, considered, potentially behavior changed, that I trust if someone is giving me feedback, they are doing it for my benefit, that they are doing it for my growth and development, that they see something that I might not be aware of, and that we can work towards that. So as we think about this next, this is you, Kyle. Go.
You had that transition built up. Go and finish that bridge. Finish that roll.
Okay. So when we are considering an inclusion, diversity, and equity context, how can trust be built? I want to hear some voices here. So 2 or 3 people come off mute and share, how can trust be built through an inclusion, diversity, and equity lens?
Show up consistently.
Thank you, Rachel. Show up consistently. Fran, I see you're off mute. Do you want to add?
I'm off mute. Oh, well,
You don't have to. That's okay.
okay. Yeah, not ready. Not ready.
Jill.
I just said, you listen and learn,
Yeah.
About, who you're working with and who you're interacting with, and, and try to proceed in a conversation, or, giving feedback, knowing who that person is and how they might respond. So.
Thanks, Jill. When someone says, ouch, own it and learn from it, that's great. You can add in the chat also. I'm thinking about also the ability to consider how trust could align with our biases and the willingness to acknowledge that, right? Do I only trust people who look like me, act like me, communicate like me, etc.? And if that's the case, then why? And how can I work on that? And then who and how can I process things with while still maintaining a level of trust, right? I think that that can be really important as well. So considering how we are building trust, how we are consistently showing up, how we are communicating what is of importance to us, that we are open and encouraging these conversations to happen, especially as supervisors, managers, and people in leadership positions, is really important. Because then our next one asks the question, in an inclusion, diversity, and equity context, how is trust broken? This one arguably might be a little bit more accessible for folks. How might trust be broken? Either for you, or how have you seen it be broken? In the chat or off mute. I wonder what the silence is about. Just curious. I'm seeing some, maybe this is more accessible in the chat. Personal information being shared with general community. Yeah. Sometimes societal events can erode trust in a team. I have seen trust broken time and time again through a lack of respect. Thank you. Knowingly hitting triggers is a lack of respect. So kind of knowing people's hot buttons and poking at them can be demonstrative that the person doesn't have the intention to give feedback for the benefit of the receiver, for the benefit of the community, continued learning, etc. I think also, I'm really glad that a person in the chat brought up respect, because I think respect can look a lot of different ways for different people. And especially when we go back to how we were socialized around communication styles, I might think that to be respectful, someone needs to approach me with kindness, as I define it, with affinity, with softness, and that's respect, right? That might not be for everyone here, where someone else might be like, respect is getting real with me. Respect is being able to hold whatever comes. It could be a variety of different things. So it is necessary to interrogate or think about and consider some of the words and what those mean to us. So I'm really, really glad that that opportunity was brought up. Kyle?
Oh, so there we go.
That was a
So
fast transition.
it was a very fast transition because I was like still hoping there was another transition in there. So yeah, so we're talking about trust, right? And we think about, you know, all these pieces that build into how we learn how to operate and be socialized, our ability to become more competent. We talk about ourself in the form of how we've been socialized and how we continue to either uphold or blindly maybe walk through a white supremacy culture. And then this whole concept of trust, right? While we did not do trust justice, let's just name it, right? We could spend a whole semester on trust alone. There's probably a whole class on it that you can take. The reality is that the concepts of building it are there to be seen, to be validated, to be heard as a part of that. And we know that all of that plays a role in giving feedback. And so what we're going to switch into briefly here is this whole concept of giving feedback. And we're going to go fairly quickly through that because, as Emily said at the beginning, is we really want to, you know, really focus a lot on receiving as well, right? Because it's easy to talk. It's easy to say something. It's easy to go ahead and point the finger at somebody. But let's talk about the realities of us doing it for ourselves and really holding that mirror up to ourselves and think about how do we receive? Because I can give feedback all day, but do I really want to receive it? Maybe not. I don't know. So we're going to get into this just a little bit. So we're going to launch a poll. It has 3 questions for you to answer. I will just name that the third one has a slight word alteration in it. So question 3 is, how often do you give feedback to your employees? And it should say every chance I get instead of every change. That's on me. G's and C's were always the same growing up. So take a few seconds to answer these 3 quick questions. And you should have a submit button at the bottom once you finish. Give it a couple more seconds. We have a few more friends joining in the voting. All right, we're at 100%. We got an A+. So just to look at these results together, what are your feelings around giving positive feedback? 70% of the folks here are like, really positive. See what I did there, right? So we noticed that a lot of us here in this space are like, I really, really like it. It's good. Some of us are like, it's pretty good, but I don't love it. We don't know reasons why, right? Some people are just like, I don't really think about it. I don't know what to say, when to say it. Some people are like, it feels kind of awkward maybe, and we don't know what that might mean. And then some people are like, I don't do it much. And there's some self-awareness there. And we don't, again, the whys behind that, we're not sure. But we know that we are not alone in some different ways. Do you like to give constructive feedback? And most of the folks said sometimes it depends on who they are as an employee. And let me guess that sometimes it depends on who they are is probably the one-on-one relationship you have with them. If it's that one employee you don't like to speak with, it's that one employee that you always know will come for your throat and ask you the whys outside of everything but the right thing that they're supposed to do, because we all have those employees, right? Yeah, it's that one-on-one relationship. And so know that it's okay that we're not always up for or the most confident or comfortable with giving constructive feedback, right? There's some folks who are like, I don't have the right things to say, which when we add a DEI lens to things, diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, a lot of times it's that go-to that people are like, I don't think I'm going to say the right thing. I think I'm going to do more harm. I don't think I'm going to do the topic justice. We have that fear and confusion, which is that socialized behavior, right? And then, yes, it's helpful for my employees to get honest, constructive feedback. There's a large majority of folks that answered that as well. So again, we're not alone in this space. So just know that as we continue to talk and process and think and reflect, there are people in this space you can go to and engage with and hopefully trust, see what I did there, that we can have further conversation and build some learning together. And then that last question is, how often do you give feedback to your employees? And you can definitely scroll down and see what that is. It says, I wait for them to give me feedback first because I'm polite like that. There you go, right? Or every chance I get, a large number of folks were there monthly. So we had the largest responses there. And then whenever there's an evaluation, had some folks answer that as well, right? And we ask this not to say that there's one right way to do this. However, I know that we do lean more towards, with even the research and the theorists and the best practices that are out there, say that we should be giving feedback as often as we can, as timely as we can. And we shouldn't always wait for a one annual evaluation, because then we're not providing them an opportunity to develop and become better at that. So just know that while all of these answers are okay, they're actually okay together in concert with one another, and they're okay separately. But really trying to figure out, we're actually giving feedback every time we engage with someone. If you really truly think about it, every interaction is a feedback interaction. It might not be formal, but it could be informal. And so we wanted to just share this again. No one's alone, that we all have a lot of different thoughts and responses as to how we see feedback and utilize feedback. And we want that to continue to carry us through as we go through this next section, albeit briefly. It's going to feel a little bit more lecture-y because we want to get this sort of baseline out of the way for folks so that we can speak some more into that space around receiving and connecting that to ourselves. So some types of feedback, this might be new for some of you. It might be a reminder for folks, but just want to share these three types of feedback that we have. And one is unintentional, right? Most feedback is unintentional. Our body language, our behavior, and our reactions, as I just said, is feedback, and that's there. If Emily were to say something to me and I'm like, I just gave nonverbal feedback, Emily's either like, he must be thinking that, how could I say that? His eyes getting all big could be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe she's going on that topic. There could be so many things in there, but unintentional feedback is real and it's always happening, right? If we receive bad news, crying is feedback, right? If we receive positive praise, a smile is feedback. And so know that feedback is happening, even though it might not be in the way we always expect it to come to us. Intentional feedback is given on purpose and should be focused on being incredibly useful. This is where we go back to our definition that feedback is for the receiver. It is for that person to learn, grow, and develop and focus. And intentional feedback typically is seen where we have our meetings, where we sit down in structure, where I might ask a question and say, can you please let me know and provide feedback to me on how we're doing, right? Those should be commonplace questions that we have in our working relationships because we want to make sure we're opening that door and inviting people in. Sometimes we don't want to because we're afraid of what the answer might be. And now we have to really think about why that is, which I'm sure Emily's going to get us into. And then last but not least is the myth. And this isn't really a type of feedback, but we want to include this here because Rachel, I think you tied to this in the chat earlier, is that needing to vent and peace of mind when we want to just get it off our chest and say what we want to say, it's more like we're just trying to criticize the other person and make that person feel less than really trying to help them grow and be developed. Not saying there's not a place for that, because sometimes, let me be real, you're going to meet me in the street and I'm going to say what I need to say, right? But the reality is that's criticism. When people say, let's do some constructive criticism in the workplace, constructive criticism is an oxymoron in some ways, right? Because the reality is when you bring criticism in, you're really just wanting to tell that person about themselves because you want to make yourself feel better or make them feel less than so they know what you feel like, assuming that it's their reality or their issue that you felt the way that you felt. So criticism always benefits the giver. In most cases, it is done to make the giver feel in some way superior to the receiver. It is often negative and judgmental. If you feel like you're going to say something because it's just peace of mind and venting, maybe going to that person is not the first answer. Maybe, I don't know. But then we always say you should always approach the person that you want to share feedback with. But just know this is where that tension point lives of what criticism might mean. You can still go to that person if there's a problem, but it's how you shape that feedback. It's how you engage in that conversation. Cool. So other two types. Oh, you better speak with the pun on words there, Emily. Okay, drop that mic. Okay, so two other types of feedback. Positive and constructive, right? So positive is that praise, that motivational feedback, that reinforcement piece. Keep doing this. Yes, you're doing fantastic. We sometimes will bring pizza in, a piece of cake or cookies. I'm on food right now. Don't ask me why. It's in the afternoon. But it's those positive actions, behaviors, and words and phrases that allow that person to be validated, seen, and heard, that is uplifting what they're contributing to the team. On the flip side of that, it's the constructive behavior, the feedback. It's formative, meaning it's placed in a way and structured in a way that helps that person really grow and hear and learn from what was going on. It's developmental. It's a redirection to shift behavior. It's course correcting, right? Notice that we're not using the word negative, because negative feedback is really not a thing, because that's really where criticism comes into play. So really, we want to figure out that positive and that constructive feedback, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally. And sometimes it requires us to think about how we show up in that space, because we can impact how that person receives it. We know that communication is 93% nonverbal, right? And of that 93%, I believe 53% is nonverbal, and then the other 38 or 30, my math is really off right now, 35% is tone, right? So how do we say it and how do we express it can really truly frame how feedback comes. If I'm telling Emily, you did such a good job today, my nonverbals is not telling what my words are saying, right? People will pick up on that. And so we really need to think about how our feedback shows up and what we can do with our feedback. Any questions so far around types of feedback and how we give feedback? Or not how we give, but types of feedback. Cool. All right. So as we think about the DEI portion of feedback, providing fair and equitable feedback is a part of this process. So we found some questions that you might want to ask yourself when preparing feedback, right? The office, that's fine. Have I communicated my expectations with this person? If I have not been upfront and clear with this person, how am I supposed to hold them accountable to a level of performance that they didn't even realize was the level that they're supposed to be operating at, right? So we need to think about, is it fair and equitable that I'm holding, and I'm going to keep using Emily because that's what we're doing today. And is it fair and equitable that I'm holding Emily to a status in her performance that she didn't even realize was expected of her? It's probably not. And so how she receives that and how I'm doing that, I could become consistently frustrated if she's not meeting my standards when she didn't even realize those were the standards I needed her to meet. So now my tone might change. The way in which I give feedback is going to look differently. I might start doing more criticism than positive or constructive. So we really need to think about we need to really pause and think about, have we communicated expectations? If we haven't, then maybe that's where we enter into the conversation around fair and equitable feedback, which might mean we need to hold that ourselves accountable for, I didn't think I shared this with you up front, so that's my bad, and let's do this moving forward. Have I gotten to know this person so I can provide individualized approach and support? And is that my responsibility, right? We talked about that one-on-one relationship being so important in trust, in building trust, and navigating trust, as well as in providing feedback. And how people receive it can be based upon that one-on-one relationship. Emily and I have a fantastic relationship. I don't need your feedback on whether or not fantastic was the right adjective. I'm just going to say it, Emily, so own it, right? We have a fantastic relationship. Her coming at me with information as feedback is, I'm going to receive it, even if it's some constructive feedback, I'm probably going to receive it a little bit better. I'm still going to feel some kind of way probably, right? But I also will be knowing that Emily holds me in care, that that what she's sharing with me is something that I really need to know. So that individualized approach, she might realize, well, Kyle needs to hear it this way. Or I know that Kyle reacts this way in certain situations, but she wouldn't have known that if we didn't get to know each other, or that are individuals on our team. Doesn't mean you have to be best friends, but it's about that respectful relationship. And then, is it my responsibility? What role do you play, right? So if you are a colleague or coworker, it might not be as much your responsibility as if you're managing someone or leading, or the lead of a team, right? Which could be fair. If you are doing some managing up and it's your supervisor who needs that feedback, is it your responsibility? Maybe not, but if we layer in that equity, diversity, and inclusion framework, we might hold privileged identities that might protect us better. It might not be the tax that we are then going to be subjected to in the same way. So I might, as a male identified person, speak up in a space differently because I know to the male identified person who's in charge, because I know that that male identified to male identified communication might be heard differently, right? My intersections of identity might come into play differently, but we need to sometimes think what our responsibility and roles are in this case. And then last but not least, how have I created space for this person to share their needs with me? And are those needs reasonable? And have I been responsive to those needs? Have I done my work in building that rapport where they can know that they can come to me and share with me what I need them to share? Am I being reasonable? And are their needs reasonable, right? If Emily comes to me and says, I need you to buy me a Snickers bar every day for my 15-minute break, I'm gonna be like, child, please, right? That's probably not a reasonable feedback request, right? And so I might have to engage in that a little bit differently. But if Emily says, hey, Kyle, I need minutes or notes from our meetings to follow up because I feel as though I might be missing a few pieces of information based upon X, Y, and Z and how we've moved forward. That might be more reasonable to make sure that we're taking notes at meetings. I might not have to take the notes all the time. Maybe we rotate so that everyone gets a chance to take notes, right? But we just need to think about what's reasonable. So, Cam's Lobby Shop has several sizes and variations of Snicker bars. Cammy, you better be out here doing that, pushing that, selling. I see you trying to raise those numbers. It's all fantastic. Yeah. So when we think about giving feedback, did Cammy just clap it out? Oh, no, Emily did. Wait a minute, where do you get them hand signs? Okay, that's a whole nother conversation. We'll do that afterwards, spring break. Right. So when we think about giving feedback, it's about that positive or constructive, unintentional versus intentional, and then recognizing what's fair and equitable, right? Because we know that not everyone operates the same way in the workplace. Not everyone's treated the same way in the workplace, no matter how much we believe that that is the case around consistency. We know that everyone has different needs in order to be successful. And what's our role in figuring out how to get folks to become more successful? So, Emily.
All right, I want everyone to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Because Kyle just dropped some knowledge. I'm not gonna lie, like I'm sitting here thinking about, considering like when I have, when I haven't, when I've let people off the hook, when my things have been inconsistent, and that's okay, right? This is an opportunity to take a pause, to consider your own experience up to this point, and do some reflection and assessment on your own to then move forward differently, not perfectly, but maybe differently. And this next thing, what we're going to give you is a tool that provides an equation of how to do that, right? We're not going to talk about the language, the specifics of how to. Kyle and I are going to play out a scenario for you afterwards that may demonstrate some of it. But we wanted to give you access to something that you can go back to again and again to be like, ugh, what was it? In this really easily palpable bite size, like what I did there. The Snickers conversation on the chat is just going wild. But we're gonna share that video in one moment. Where's my computer? If putting on the glasses, I know there's a lot more glare, but my eyeballs legitimately hurt and I'm getting a headache. So I had to text my partner and say, can you bring in your blue light glasses? So that's what's up, that's going on. But I know that it provides this obnoxious glare. Okay, we ready? Sit back, 5 minutes, enjoy.
If you look at like a carpenter, they have a toolbox. A dentist, they have their drills. In our era and the type of work most of us are doing, the tool we most need is actually centered around being able to give and receive feedback well. Humans have been talking about feedback for centuries. In fact, Confucius, way back in 500 BC, talked about how important it is to be able to say difficult messages well. But to be honest, we're still pretty bad at it. In fact, a recent Gallup survey found that only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they get actually improves their work. Those numbers are pretty dismal. So what's going on? The way that most people give their feedback actually isn't brain friendly. People fall into one of two camps. Either they're of the camp that is very indirect and soft, and the brain doesn't even recognize that feedback is being given, or it's just simply confused. Or they fall into the other camp of being too direct. And with that, it tips the other person into the land of being defensive. And there's this part of the brain called the amygdala, and it's scanning at all times to figure out whether the message has a social threat attached to it. With that, we'll move forward in defensiveness, or we'll move backwards in retreat. And what happens is the feedback giver then starts to dysregulate as well. They add more ums and ahs and justifications, and the whole thing gets wonky really fast. It doesn't have to be this way. I and my team have spent many years going into different companies and asking who here is a great feedback giver. Anybody who's named again and again, we actually bring into our labs to see what they're doing differently. And what we find is that there's a 4-part formula that you can use to say any difficult message well. Okay, are you ready for it? Here we go. The first part of the formula is what we call the micro yes. Great feedback givers begin their feedback by asking a question that is short but important. It lets the brain know that feedback is actually coming. It would be something, for example, like, do you have 5 minutes to talk about how that last conversation went? Or I have some ideas for how we can improve things. Can I share them with you? This micro yes question does 2 things for you. First of all, it's going to be a pacing tool. It lets the other person know that feedback is about to be given. And the second thing it does is it creates a moment of buy-in. I can say yes or no to that yes or no question. And with that, I get a feeling of autonomy. The second part of the feedback formula is going to be giving your data point. Here you should name specifically what you saw or heard and cut out any words that aren't objective. There's a concept we call blur words. A blur word is something that can mean different things to different people. Blur words are things that are not specific. So for example, if I say, you shouldn't be so defensive, or you could be more proactive. What we see great feedback givers doing differently is they'll convert their blur words into actual data points. So for example, instead of saying, you know, you aren't reliable, we would say, you said you'd get that email to me by 11, and I still don't have it yet. Specificity is also important when it comes to positive feedback. And the reason for that is that we want to be able to specify exactly what we want the other person to increase or diminish. And if we stick with blur words, they actually won't have any clue particularly what to do going forward to keep repeating that behavior. The third part of the feedback formula is the impact statement. Here you name exactly how that data point impacted you. So for example, I might say, because I didn't get the message, I was blocked on my work and couldn't move forward. Or I really liked how you added those stories because it helped me grasp the concepts faster. It gives you a sense of purpose and meaning and logic between the points, which is something the brain really craves. The fourth part of the feedback formula is a question. Great feedback givers wrap their feedback message with a question. They'll ask something like, well, how do you see it? Or this is what I'm thinking we should do. But what are your thoughts on it? What it does is it creates commitment rather than just compliance. It makes the conversation no longer be a monologue, but rather becomes a joint problem-solving situation. But there's one last thing. Great feedback givers not only can say messages well, but also they ask for feedback regularly. In fact, our research on perceived leadership shows that you shouldn't wait for feedback to be given to you, what we call push feedback, but rather you should actively ask for feedback, what we call pulling feedback. Pulling feedback establishes you as a continual learner and puts the power in your hands. The most challenging situations are actually the ones that call for the most skillful feedback. But it doesn't have to be hard. Now that you know this 4-part formula, you can mix and match it to make it work for any difficult conversation.
All right. While Kyle is resharing his screen, I want you to put in the chat what stood out. Quick, what did you just hear? What will you take away? Mm. Mm-hmm.
Emily, I'm not gonna lie, I looked over after you asked that question, and the first thing I saw was 2 words, dark chocolate, and I was like, what?
Stop. I don't think anyone else got that. Did anyone else see that in the chat? I'm like, oh my. Okay. Commitment versus compliance. Don't use blur words. Be specific. Ending with a question. Giving detailed feedback sooner than later. Specificity versus blur words. Micro consent. Asking for feedback more and more often versus waiting for it. Data driven. Ask for feedback. That the brain actual desires framework. That's great. Thank you very much. So some of that 4-part formula can be integrated how it makes sense for you. It's not going to fit for everyone, right? We wanted to provide you some tools and be like, ooh, what are those things that has been proven in some scenarios and situations? And context and identity really matters, right? The context of the situation, the environment, time, place, manner, whether it's in front of a lot of people, whether it's one-on-one, all of that matters in terms of when you're making those choices about how to approach. Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown likes to say, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. I am some of that wobbly feedback giver that does the ums and ahs and like loses my footing. Whereas I know colleagues of mine who are really direct, and I have worked really hard to build my stamina to be in those conversations, knowing it's not a personal attack for me. We're going to talk about that in the later third. Kyle and M, any pointers on when you ask for feedback and the person asked either has the deer in the headlights or launches into all negative? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Nancy, the hope is that if we learn how to do feedback in controlled and scaled and paced manners, meaning like we do it in small increments, we do it multiple times, that it hopefully won't react with a deer in the headlights look. And it's about being specific in your ask, right? Like if I just go and say, do you have anything that you need to say to me about what I'm doing? That opens up the door to so many things that I think it can also create this piece of like, I don't really know. And it could launch into some of the negative pieces that people, or constructive pieces that people are sharing that aren't related to what you're hopefully asking for. And so sometimes it's even how you phrase the question might mitigate some of the constructiveness of it. So I might say to Emily, I feel like I've done that. I haven't been able to do this piece of my job properly when I've been engaging with you. Is there a way in which I could make this more successful for both of us? Then they might be focused on the positive of what they need rather than the negative or constructive of what I haven't done, is what comes to mind for me.
That's great. The only thing I would add, I think, oh no, also to Kyle's point about the deer in the headlights, if people aren't familiar with this, like, right, you might drop into your staff meeting and be like, I just went to this workshop on feedback. Now I need you all to give me all the feedback. We've never done this before, but you definitely should do this right now, all the things. You are either going to get deer in the headlights or you're going to get a barrage of negativity. We need to be realistic that we may work in environments where open feedback channels have not been the cultural norm. And so if that is the case for us, there will be a barrage of kind of pent up anger and frustration. And if someone is a staff member, is maybe on a subordinate or kind of lower level of the, I feel like I'm using weird words for that, but in terms of like as a staff member, they're being supervised and the supervisor is all of a sudden like, I want to know what's going on with you and how we could do things better. They're gonna be like, you have never asked me this before. I'm going to use this one opening that I have all of these things to say and share with you. To Kyle's point, if that keeps happening over and over again, if as the receiver, we are able to hold those feedback places and not get defensive and jump down their throat, then that will decrease. There might be a release, right? There might be a, oh my gosh, I didn't expect to be heard, but I was. All of the things, right? And setting expectations to say, it sounds like there are some things that have been really hard. And while I can't promise that we're going to be able to fix all of them overnight, I want you to be part of the solution in this with me. So how do you see things going differently? What would work for us? And inviting some of the accountability on them to come up with solutions as well. hopefully that helps. That's a great question from the chat, because I think that that could be something where a lot of folks are dealing with. Any other offerings, expertise, or experience from the group before we move on?
I find that the longer I go between asking my employees for feedback, the more negative it is. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said, like, they're going to take that one opportunity they have to give you, they're going to spill it all because they might not ever get this chance again, especially if they're not used to you doing something like that regularly. And it's, yeah, I lost my train of thought after that. There was more to that, but that's all I got. Sorry.
Well, it was affirming that actually works. And from your personal experience, I like that the longer you go, the more negative it is, right? Because the longer people feel not heard or not affirmed or valued that their perspective matters, it builds up. So Cami, that was great. Thank you.
I do remember it now. It's that, like when you're writing, think about like a Yelp review, like you only write your review when you're really angry. Really, people usually don't write a Yelp review for something that's super favorable, because we hang on to those negative experiences so much easier than we do those positive ones. So like if you go too long in between asking for feedback, then their memory has already put away all those good things, but they've hold on to all those bad things. So then when they do finally have a chance to vent, all they can think of is the things that stick out, and that's going to be the negative things.
Thanks, Cami. You're absolutely right. Whereas, have you ever been in like retail situations and they're like, hey, if you had a good experience, will you give us a review on Google? If anyone, like, all the reviews are so like Twitter, Google, Yelp, those things really matter. And so we try to pillow it with all the good things, like, but you have to prompt people almost sometimes. Whereas if it's like, I don't think that went well, I'm not going to tell them to give me a Yelp review. Right? So there's some things.
I also like one more thing, Emily. I think the thing that came up for me, Cami, too, and this in my head, it made a connection, but it might not make a connection in real time. But when approaching and asking for feedback, regardless of the amount of time that has gone, proactively de-escalating by owning up to whether owning up or acknowledging, I'll say, the thing that has gone wrong, saying like, hey, I noticed this didn't work really well. What are some ideas that you have that would improve it for the next time? Is different than just saying, that sucked. You have any feedback for me? Right? Or even just saying, hey, what feedback do you have? Right? Because then again, we're controlling it in some ways, but we're also allowing ourselves to step in it and just say, I've noticed that this hasn't been going well recently. And I'm wondering, as the person who's a part of this or having to carry this out, do you have ideas as to how we can make it better? Right? Because now we're asking them for ideas. We're asking them to be a part of the solution. They still might come in and be like, yeah, it was horrible. Right? Tell me about it. Like, how do we be in community with that? So it's not us and them or me versus you. It's how do we make this better for both of us, or focus mainly on them and centering them in the conversation? Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. That's what came up for me, hearing that.
All right, so we're going to do this thing. Do you want to introduce it or do you want me to?
You do that.
Okay, all right. So we, Kyle and I were talking, we're like, man, feedback, it takes trust. So usually we watch this thing and then we have people go and practice feedback. We were like, it's late afternoon, it's tired. Maybe they would like to see a performance. So Kyle came up with I was trying to give credit where credit due, not if this goes badly. True story, y'all. We have not practiced this. This is like a dry run, but we wanted it to be as authentic as possible. So we've come up with a scenario that we're going to look through with some points that we've covered as a break from you all practicing. And these skills will not get better if you don't practice. So that's what we'll say. And in this feedback activity, I think how we're going to do is, Kyle, if you stop sharing your screen, and then I'm going to spotlight both of us so that that's what folks can see during this time.
Emily, I got something I need to get off my chest.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what you mean.
Look, I'm trying to tell you I have a problem with something you do, and I wish you'd just stop because it really just creates so many problems for me.
Oh, well, sorry, I'm a little taken aback. I'm running to this next meeting. I want to hear about this, but I don't think I can right now. Can we set up another time?
Interlude. So in this situation, we're doing what we're supposed to do, right? Trying to give feedback. Emily's hopefully will receive that feedback. But the reality was the way in which I approached it probably was not the best. If we were to do a quick poll, I'm guessing if we were to say, how would you feel if someone approached you this way? 99.18% of the room probably would have said, not today, Satan. I'm backing out. I'm scared. I don't know what's going on for me. My whole bubble gut system is turning loops in my stomach, right? And what I'm doing is creating an unwelcoming and uninviting environment for us to be able to actually be in community and for me to actually be able to give feedback that Emily will actually receive.
To that point also, because identity and context matter, it is important that I don't just slough it off, but I assess what I need to be able to enter in and prepare myself for that. So I can assess what I need and make those asks, but it is inappropriate for me to work or police maybe how that came at the beginning, but we'll go more into that in a second.
Okay. And sometimes in certain situations, a clapback might happen, right? Because Emily might be like, good. Oh, you want to come at me? You open the can, you about to get all this smoke, right? Because Emily might have something that she wants to share with me as well, right? So how we open doors for each other in this space could definitely lead down multiple avenues. But at the basis of it, at least if we strip apart our feelings, the attitude, the accusatory tone, and some of the uncertainties of what's about to happen, we can at least say that we tried to start the conversation, but we probably need to be more specific in what we're about to say. So I might have come to Emily in a different way, say, hey, Emily, do you have a second? There's something that's been bothering me and I'd really like to chat with you about it, which would have had a whole different tone, potentially. I'm guessing. Right, okay, nonverbal communication, beautiful. Cool, so coming back.
And see. Hey, Kyle, I'm really glad that you could make this time work. Thanks for rescheduling with me.
Yeah, it's a good time. Thanks for suggesting that. Before we get started though, I wanted to apologize for the way I opened this topic with you the last time. I've had time to think about it and I realized it probably wasn't the best approach.
Thanks. I just was surprised at the beginning. I value you as a colleague and I want to be in this with you. So I knew I couldn't do it at the moment. So I really appreciate you owning that and coming back to it because it matters.
Yeah. Interlude. So in this situation, I was able to have reflected upon what I was doing, what I may have done, and I offered that up, right? It was very vulnerable maybe for me to do so. One of those F words, I think we call it feelings that I had to exude in that moment, right? I had to own up to what I did in that space. And I also had to really consider Emily's response. Like, I don't know what her response may have been. She could have been like a lot worse than what she was with me just now, or she could have just fluffed it off and not acknowledged it, which could have also left me in a way of feeling discombobulated with where to go next with this. Emily, things you'd add from what you see? Okay. I would also say what was important that Emily did in this situation is that she didn't let me off the hook, right? She acknowledged the thank you, and she also then spoke into it and said, yeah, this is what the impact it was on me. Because a lot of times, based upon our identity, sometimes we just shrug it off like, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. And a lot of times we're doing that from our subordinated identity lens. And typically with the identities that we're holding here, if we were to go from our privilege lenses, mine as a male identified cisgender male and Emily as a white identified individual, like she could have placated my maleness and just been like, oh, don't worry about it. It's okay. That's just what it happens. And then that could have just kept my ego in check in a different way as a male identified person potentially. So this is the complexity that's happening with socialized behaviors and some of those white supremacy culture pieces that we talked about that we need to be mindful of when we're in feedback situations. We ready to go back in and see? Okay. So thanks for offering your perspective, Emily. It's really given me more to think about. I didn't realize, I mean, I knew when I thought about it how much it was going to harm you, and it's really not what I wanted to happen. And so I'll definitely be thoughtful of that the next time. But the initial conversation I really wanted to have with you was about the interaction we had last Wednesday when we were meeting. You remember when we were hanging out and meeting last week? It was Wednesday, right around, I think it was in the afternoon, and we were in Palmer 3.
Okay, yeah.
During this meeting, at one point, you had cut me off and took control of the conversation and made light of the comment I had just made about not understanding the direction of setting up the activity we were supposed to co-lead. I think it was even something like, I was like, I'm not really 100% sure what, and then you were like, oh my goodness, whatever, you'll get it, it'll be fine, da 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 da. And when I shared an idea, I didn't feel like you listened to my input when I suggested it. For us setting up groups after instructions are given and then providing an example for each group, you just sort of interrupted before I could finish and offered up your idea, which is what we ended up doing in the final outline. And it didn't even acknowledge the parts of my idea that you presented as your own.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Wow. I'm really sorry that happened. I want to think more about it, but you also do have to realize, like, you come across kind of funny sometimes. And so, like, it's hard to know when you're being serious and not. And so, I actually just feel like, I mean, I'll think about it, but I don't
So
know.
it just happened again because I wasn't actually done and you just sort of jumped in and interrupted. And then you even pointed out something again about me, which I'm willing to hear. And that wasn't really what I wanted to share. And I've noticed you've done this a few times before, and I didn't realize it was happening until that moment, because there were some other things going on for me, and it gave me some clarity around the situation. And so I really need you to think about how we can continue to engage with one another and hear each other and give each other credit.
When I'm thinking back to that time, I think that I know that happened. I trust that is what happened for you. I want to sit and think about it more. As I said in the beginning, our relationship matters a lot to me, and the ways that we work together. And I don't want you feeling that way, that I'm taking credit for things that aren't mine to take credit for. And I want you to have all the props, and I want to work together to co-create things too. So, would it be all right with you if I came and circled back with you to talk with this as I've reflected on it a little bit later?
Yeah. I think that could work.
I really want to thank you for having the conversation, though. I know it's not always the easiest, and I might also not always be the easiest. So thanks.
Yeah. I appreciate you listening and acknowledging that. And I do value our relationship as well. And I think there's some really great things that we can continue to do. I oftentimes am interrupted and not heard in spaces. And so to have that happen from you because of the relationship we have, it just felt like it hurt that much more.
I can understand that. I will commit to reflect and to monitor my behavior in the future.
Thank you. So this scene, like the scenario can be seen in multiple ways, right? Like, I mean, we were getting real at the end there. Like, I mean, let's just be real. We would have broken out into song, but we didn't have time to sort of finish the harmonies. But, oh, there I was being funny again. Haha, truth is real. Can be seen in multiple, right? And so how do we, like, in this scenario, could it easily been flipped, right? Had Emily come at me with the interrupting piece, it could have been an identity piece from her subordinated piece and my dominated piece, right? In this case, race may have been playing out, but I never called it into space as to what it was explicitly, which means that sometimes when we are providing feedback, and as the receiver, we might not hear the words that are actually being said, but we might acknowledge and hear what is not said, right? We can listen to the words being said, but we need to pay attention to what's not being said as well. Things that you want to jump in on before?
I really appreciated that, Kyle, you went a little bit off script and in the, I mean, both of us did, right? To be honest, I could have done more to prepare for this. So that's feedback for me personally. I'm just glad it went the way it did, because while you didn't identify race overtly, you could have. And the part that you did say was, I get interrupted a lot. And it's been my experience over and over again. And so because we had that relationship and I could hear that, you know, I really love Dr. Vernon Wall. He talks about how the ism might not always be present, but the identity always is. And so we need to leave space for the possibility, and in some cases probability, that it is related to our marginalized identities because they are intentionally being pushed to the margins. And so I appreciated that part that you added in, and you know, where we went to at the end. So
yeah, I think the other thing that was good to remember in this situation, I mean, besides all of it, is that we specified the behavior, right? We specified the time so that Emily and I could be on the same page of what I was actually referring to. And again, because it's a role play, we may not have gotten as specified as possible with the exact words that could have been done, but to be as specific as possible can help make sure that people are on the same page. And oftentimes someone might say, actually, I don't remember that. And that sometimes is a way, it's the truth that people might not remember the interaction. And sometimes people might be like, well, since I don't remember it, I guess it didn't happen, right? And so if we're the person receiving information and we don't actually remember it, maybe we need to provide the benefit of the doubt in that situation and see where it goes, right? Because it might call upon us to own behavior that which we don't remember. And I believe, Cammie, you're the person that said it before, like we remember the things that harm us or that are more negative or that stick out to us sometimes more than the positive things. And so in this situation, since this didn't happen to us, we might not remember it. And sometimes we want to forget if we've caused harm to others. So knowing our own experiences and knowing what our own hot buttons are and what our own approaches are going to be key in figuring out how feedback can be given and received in this space. And so making sure that we could have gone on and Emily could say, hey, since we're talking, there's something else I'd also like to bring up, right? And so therefore we both could have aired, or I could have invited that in at the end, actually, because it would have been really horrible if Emily just said, well, since you started something, maybe I could have then finished it and said, yeah, I really appreciate you having this conversation. Since we're in this space together, is there something that you would like to share with me that I can do better as well? Because I think it's both of us to continue to cultivate this community and this relationship. So just keep that in mind and think about how this scenario could continue to evolve and how our identities were at the crux of some of this, even though, as Emily pointed out and said eloquently, I didn't say it explicitly. So with that, I'm doing a nonverbal check-in to see if we're going to move beyond to the next
We
piece?
can. I have
Yes.
prepped. Let's do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Meaning what you prepped or move beyond what you prepped?
We can be beyond what I prepped.
Okay. So what we were going to do with time, we want to make sure is that we were going to show a video by Jay Smooth, which will be in our references that you'll be able to look at your own time. And what he talks about explicitly is focusing on the behavior of a person. He tells this through a whole story, and that you focus on the behavior of a person and not the person itself. Because who I am, I might not know, but what I did is what is really the focus of this situation. And so when we thought about the behaviors that Emily and I just role played, it was about what we have done. Because Emily is not a horrible person because she kept interrupting me. She might think that internally. She might think that I think that about her, which is why she spirals into a different space. But it's really about the behavior that was exhibited that I wanted to get to the crux of. And so really that video is to reinforce when we provide feedback that we need to be, and I love, Nancy, how you put it in there, small, consistency, and specific. That we're not giving too much feedback at once, but that we're really being intentional about when we give feedback and how we give it. Emily, anything to share before we, there we go.
That's great. I'll put that in the chat. Do you want to do breakout rooms or move to section 3?
I follow your lead, my liege.
Okay. I want to get you all talking because we know that part of experiential learning is being able to reflect thus far. So we're just going to put you in quick 5-minute breakout rooms. I put in the chat the link to the J Smooth video. It will also be in the slides that we share after, but that's not going to be until probably Tuesday. And so I wanted you all to have it soon if you wanted it. This is that equation we talked about. And so in the groups, we just want you to pop off a little bit, right? Be able to talk and share about what you just saw, what you've heard so far. So what so far feels possible, what feels difficult, and what's been gained so far. So we will put you in those breakout rooms, open them now, and see you in about, it'll be 4 minutes with 60 seconds to come back. So 5 minutes in total. Oh, we're gonna bring you back in 5 minutes. It still says 6, so. So for those of you jumping back in, and if Kyle wants to share, we can go into this next piece. But we just had a short conversation in the process and debrief around the importance of student feedback. And, as someone, and I will share that, this is in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. As a white identified person who supervises students of color, I have gone through my own negotiation and reflection of, oh my gosh, I want to give this feedback. They're not doing it the way that I want them to do it. What is that about? Is that about my own socialization? Where is professionalism coming into it? And so for me, in my pendulum swing, there have been times where I have pendulum swung all the way over to, I'm not going to give feedback because they're doing it maybe in a way that I don't know. But I didn't bring up the conversation or process it. And it's taken a long time to really consider that, oh, in a job, we have expectations. If those expectations are mutually agreed upon, and then those expectations are not met, having a feedback conversation about behavior is absolutely okay, right? Because pillowing or letting folks off the hook, or you always want to be considering of identities that are involved, contexts of situation, and it is setting folks up for failure if we move through a situation and not hold to expectations that they might have. Does that kind of make sense for folks? I'm open to pushback or to additions. Kyle, I'd love your thoughts on it if you were, kind of noting what I was saying, but.
I was, and I think that comes up for some of us, and for myself even, in ways of, it might not be about identity, but identity might be where the other person enters in. And so we can't use that as a reason as to not approach the topic. And maybe it has to then change how we do our approach and name it, right? So in the example you shared, Emily, what I heard for me that came up was like, there might be another behavior that you're exhibiting based upon something I don't understand from a cultural context lens. But I wanted to talk through with you about the behavior that you're exhibiting in the workplace at this moment, or about this specific incident. I would love to hear more about your rationale for jumping in that way. That way, it's not like you did this wrong, and then they're like, well, it's because you're white, you don't understand, right? And I know that from my colleagues who have shared things with me that is like the thing that prevents us from stepping in, because we don't want those words to hit us, that it's the identity piece or that it's this. And even though we know it's at the center of how we interact, and we don't know how to solve that problem, because if I did, I'd be a millionaire and we wouldn't have these problems and we wouldn't have to do these sessions. However, we have to figure out if that's the fear that's preventing us from stepping in. Maybe we bring the fear to the forefront and make it explicit, as Emily cited Stephanie Monarera on that as well, around maybe we need to make it explicit as to what could be happening, but what is not also happening from the reason why I'm talking into this space. I don't know. Guess that works. Maybe it doesn't. But so looking at time, I'll be that person around sense of urgency. We have about 32 minutes. And so we're going to really shift into this section 3 space around receiving feedback, and particularly around identities of privilege. And so Emily, where we've gone, again, let you all know. So it's sort of all continuing the scaffold and build.
So we're going to start this with a quote taken from Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. And it really stood out to me. And I want us to really consider and think through our identities of privilege that we might have and hold. And I would state confidently that everyone in the room, because we have access to this training, because we're a part of the CSU community in some different ways, we have some identities of privilege that we might be able to access. And so this talks about race, and that's really important. I also want us to think about our varieties and areas of privilege. In my workshops, I often ask people of color, how often have you given white people feedback on our unaware yet inevitable racism? How often has that gone well for you? Eye rolling, head shaking, and outright laughter follow, along with the consensus of rarely, if ever. I then ask, what would it be like if you could simply give us feedback, have us graciously receive it, reflect, and work to change the behavior? Recently, a man of color sighed and said, it would be revolutionary. I asked my fellow whites to consider the profundity of that response. It would be revolutionary if we could receive, reflect, and work to change the behavior. On the one hand, the man's response points to how difficult and fragile we are, but on the other hand, it indicates how simple it can be to take responsibility for our racism. However, we aren't likely to get there if we are operating from the dominant worldview that only intentionally mean people can participate in racism.
Yeah, I feel better that it wasn't me.
So I want us to sit with that quote just for a moment to recognize that the ways that we receive or don't receive feedback has a consequential effect and impact into the arenas and areas that we are creating. Directly back to the principles of community, to enact a community that centers inclusion, integrity, respect, service, and social justice is to do work around these areas, and specifically around receiving feedback. Are there any reflections or offerings either in the chat or from folks? Have you heard this before? Okay. Want to just hold it and center this as we're thinking about the continuation of the work. Kyle, anything you'd add? And next slide.
So there are things I'd add. So by centering that, but some of the fragility pieces that DiAngelo brings in is that it's hard to receive feedback, and fragility could be one of those reasons, right? We don't understand, we might not know what's centering it for us, but there's so many things here, but we're trying to sort of start the conversation, right? And I ask that you think about for you a time where you may not have received feedback well, and what was at the center of that. And a lot of it, we talk about white supremacy culture, the either or thinking, the fear of conflict, and this perfectionism drives us, right? And even into that defensiveness area, drives us to not be able to receive feedback openly, right? Because there might be this piece of, there's no way I could ever do something wrong, or, you know, what might they think of me beyond this? And even in my own lived experience, like I received feedback once, and my first response was like, no, that can't be it. And I tried to give a reason why it couldn't be it. And even thinking back to that, I'm still like, I can't believe I went there. I can't believe I said that. Out of all the things I could have said, I said that, right? And what I was doing, I still can't always see both sides of like, oh, wait a minute, did I do that? But that wasn't the intention, but there was impact, and was able to talk through with the other person what went down and what was going on in that situation. But a lot of this white supremacy culture breeds itself out into the expectations that we might hold of others, of how people are supposed to give us feedback and what it's supposed to look like and what it's supposed to be about. There's a self-esteem piece for ourselves of, wait a minute, if someone says that, if someone's giving me this feedback, it means that I'm not as good as I thought, or maybe now there's nothing that I can do that is right. Sometimes we catastrophize everything. There's rules of engagement, which goes back to the expectations that I mentioned around how it's supposed to go down, who's supposed to speak first, when it's supposed to happen, how you're supposed to stop. There's some internalized oppression pieces that we start believing that which is right about us based upon an identity, that of course I'm supposed to mess up, or, oh, I can't believe I messed up, and so therefore now I'm no good, and you know, it starts to then, you know, spiral there. And then our socialization and experiences. We might even be recalling upon previous ways that we've had feedback given to us that did not go well, or that did go well, and we're like, if it didn't go well, we're like, oh no, it's about to go there again, I don't want to feel that. Or it did go well, but wait a minute, how this person's doing it isn't going in that direction, because they're not saying these words, or they're not doing it in this way. And so we want us to recognize that it's so hard for us to receive feedback at times, because we are so in our own heads around what should be happening. And then we start building out those circles of, well, if this is what's happened here, maybe they're going to think this, and this next. I mean, Emily and I have even had moments like that as recently as 20 minutes ago, right? Around what we think is supposed to happen because of what we are inviting in, because either one of us are in our own spaces around socialization and rules of engagement and expectations. Anything to add, Emily?
No, that was great. Feedback, that was great. So Kyle was talking about rules of engagement and how white supremacy culture impacts our environments, whether we are conscious of them or not. And so when we're talking about receiving feedback, there are a variety of, there's a list of rules that we may experience. Not all of them might ring true, but I know as a white person, I read them and I was like, oh, yeah. So we wanted to just uplift the reality that some of these rules are playing out and create a barrier from being able to hear feedback. So we think that proper tone is crucial, right? I can't hear you if you are coming at me like that. You need to calm down and then you can come talk to me, right? That is what we have called tone policing, not we, a researcher has called tone policing. And saying, no, I'm shut down, right? There's all that like fight or flight, but building that stamina allows us to hear whatever tone needs to come if feedback needs to be given, because we can't always control how feedback is coming at us. We can control what we can do to prepare and be ready for that, right? So this is one of the rules of engagement. So proper tone is crucial. You must be as indirect as possible. Highlighting my racial privilege invalidates the oppression I experience. Okay. An example of this might be hey, some of the things that you were saying were rooted in racism. And it's like, well, you know, my disability doesn't allow me to think about this. And I actually can't hear this right now. I have to leave. Now, all of that can be true. And I am not trying to harp on different abilities, but it's this kind of connection of that breaks the conversation, right? So it invalidates, if you bring up my racial privilege, it invalidates oppression from identities that I might experience. You must, so right, if I'm talking at Kyle, you must acknowledge that my intentions are always good. You have to tell me that I'm a good person. You have to lift up and be like, I know you didn't mean to do this, blah, 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 right? I have this whole list. And to suggest that my behavior has a racial impact to me is to have misunderstood me, right? So all of these, I would encourage folks, I know that there are some conundrums around Dr. D'Angelo's book right now. I have found there to be content in it that was wildly helpful for me in terms of my anti-racist work, along with a plethora of other authors, specifically Dr. Brittany Cooper around eloquent rage, specifically how to be an anti-racist. There's a lot of books out there, and White Fragility did a lot for me in continuing my education around it. Because when I look honestly at this list, and I have gotten feedback before and I have felt defensive, it was because one or more of these was not done, right? I didn't want to hear it. I didn't think I needed to hear it because they didn't come at me properly, right? And so these rules of engagement are always impacting and kind of around us. And so we need to acknowledge that they're there so that we can work to move beyond it. I was like, why are people laughing? In the chat, it says the bookstore does not have stickers. We do have White Fragility. So way to bring it back around. I appreciate it. Oh gosh, Kyle, what would you add?
Nothing. I was just thinking about the interactions that we have in these spaces and how they will not look the same in training spaces in person, because we won't be able to have these conversations concurrently happening and building on the content. So that's where my mind was at. Ready?
Go on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we want to talk about receiving feedback in relation to equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? So Emily has done a great job framing for us these pieces that might show up for some of us from a privileged lens and a privileged identity. And while it might be based upon, well, not might, it is based upon the work from D'Angelo's White Fragility, let's think about how we can transfer that to other privileged identities that we have, right? So I might look at it from my male identity or my able-bodied lens identity of, you know, some of the concepts of like, how do you acknowledge intentions, or, you know, highlighting my male privilege and pieces like that. So just know that these are some transferable places. So we want to provide you with a few pieces of thinking around how do you receive feedback from a few high level places, and what to do with it and what maybe not to do with it. So the first is solicit and encourage, right? And we've talked about this previously, is how do we open ourselves up to feedback and how do we communicate that we're open to it? And while the first one is probably going to be done verbally, and some of it can be done non-verbally because we overhear things or we think things and we wind up actually following through on it, how do we encourage folks to do this in a way that allows us to truly open the door for those lines of communication? Emily? Did you want me to just keep going, or do you want every other one? Okay, cool. So listening to what is being said and shared. So actively listening, constructivist listening, where we actually give our power over to the other person to share their experience and validate what they are going through. Whether or not we agree or not, doesn't really matter. You can actually validate someone without agreeing with them. And so how do we listen to what is being said and shared? And as I've said earlier, I believe in this time is, how do we listen to what's also not being said, right? And so making sure that we pay attention to the entire communication spectrum that's going on, the tone and the nonverbal body language as well. How do we reflect on what occurred from the viewpoint shared, right? So even in Emily and I's interaction, she reflected upon what I was going through and I reflected upon what she was going through. And we have to reflect upon our own actions, our own behaviors, our own contributions to the situation that may have occurred and think about what happened in that moment so we can reflect in action and on action, right? So we might not be able to do it in the moment because our minds might be like, nah, I'm really focused here and this is what I can do, but making sure that we give ourselves that time to continue to reflect afterward and then follow back up to continue to close that feedback loop. Learn is a part of the receiving feedback piece. We have to learn more about the information that's being presented, right? We can't learn this from the person who's providing us feedback, right? We cannot. We're now taking away their ability to share their story, their experience, and their needs by saying, okay, now I need you to teach me everything as to why that's not happening or why that's not right. How do you go out and look up your own information and do your own work is important for us when receiving feedback. And then again, following back up and being like, okay, I've had more time to reflect upon this. Don't look for a pat on the back and say, I went and searched 7 articles and 2 documentaries and I learned so much and now we're going to do this. And let me tell you what I learned. Probably not the thing you need to do in that space. You then will probably get some nonverbal feedback in that moment, right? How do we seek understanding, right? To shift our perspective, to try and understand what was just shared and how hard it was for this to come to us, right? We always talk about that walk a mile in someone else's shoes or see through the eyes of the other person. And it's not always easy to do, but how do we continue to try and seek that understanding, right? How do we understand our own history, the story, our own past, and what's maybe preventing us from being able to do that? And the collective past history and stories that we've been told and learned and socialized to believe. So it's seeking understanding with yourself and others, right? Because I might be hearing something and I have to think about why is this hitting me so hard, right? What's going on for me? Where did this come from? And this is what this person is going through. So I need to also then think about what am I doing to contribute to that person's situation and scenario that they're dealing with.
So the next one is apologize where applicable. So not when it is unnecessary. There are many people who will just default and be like, sorry. I didn't mean to, I'm sorry. Now that is not taking into account those other pieces, that seeking to understand, that learning. So apologizing where applicable. So through a genuine and authentic approach, acknowledging what you did, and trying not to explaining away why you did it, and holding that impact of your intentions and actions, right? So I think a lot of people are like, I'm really, really sorry, and this is why, or they use but you really need to consider, and it's like, oof, that negated the apology. So apologize where applicable and appropriate. Next. Process with an accountability buddy. I cannot tell you how important this one has been for me, to process with trusted people who will hold me and hold me accountable, right? Who will be compassionate, but won't let me off the hook, will allow me to process through things, and hold those emotions. Because I will tell you, I have had colleagues be like, I swear, Emily, and if you need context of this, I'm happy to provide it. If one more white woman cries at me when I am just trying to have a conversation and they think it's all feedback, right? You need to hold the emotions and process with an accountability buddy. I am happy to be that accountability buddy if you are wanting to or interested, but really considering where you can process big emotions that are coming up and how you can hold in the space. And finally, do better next time. We don't expect perfection. If we are in this work, we will make mistakes. It is absolutely inevitable. And building our stamina to be able to be in these conversations is, again, what matters. Continue to try and be better. Role model this and do so without expectation of reciprocation. Do better next time. So we're gonna, you're gonna get that little K.
So we're gonna put folks in groups of 3 or 4, depending upon how many folks are here. And what we'd like you to do is discuss these following questions. Where have you seen receiving feedback go well? Do you have an experience? Where have you seen it go poorly? And then what are 2 takeaways from this session? So we want to give you a good amount of time. We'll probably give about 5 minutes in these groups. I'm looking at Emily, recognizing our time because we can wrap this up after that. Just to sort of have this conversation and start this conversation and encourage you to figure out, who your accountability buddy might be. Is there someone in the space that you can follow back up with and engage with as well after this? Because we know that 5 minutes is never enough time. So we put the questions into the chat in groups of 2 to 3. It's been in there twice now. And there's also a link to a receiving feedback handout as well. So we're opening the Zoom tubes to transport you to Never Ever Land or wherever we're going. I don't know. You should have a Zoom link box pop up, and we will make sure that we're in touch with you to bring you back to this space. Cami stepped out.
She did, yeah.
I don't know if it just hasn't caught up and logged her out yet or not, but so when we come back in, do you?
All right. So welcome back from that small group. If you want to put in the chat any takeaways that your group talked about, that would be really wonderful. Any ways that you'd like to see these incorporated or ways that you've seen it done well. Just a little nuggets that you'll be taking away. We know that folks are reading the chat, and so that can be a good offering as we leave you with some next steps. So we hope and expect that this learning will continue, that you will remember that multicultural competence model of awareness, knowledge, skills, action, transformation, and take that action piece and move into it. And this is how you can do that. Talk about this training with at least 2 colleagues and others in your life, but make the commitment to talk to at least 2 people about this training in the next week while it's fresh. Kyle and I already have a scheduled meeting to debrief this training next week. So if we're going to talk about it, we want you to talk about it. The link to this presentation will be in the Google Drive that I'm going to share with you momentarily. And it will have all of these applicable hyperlinks in it. So strategies to decrease bias has a number of different ways that you can work on your own bias, because as we talked about, bias is a part of this, absolutely. And we didn't get to deep dive into all of the intimate connections. Go back through these training materials in 2 weeks. Put it on your calendar and then do it again in 2 months. Because we know with learning, you can go to a thing, but then you can forget the thing. And then you're like, I don't know where the thing is. At least put these materials in a place where you will remember and that you can access them again. Identify that accountability buddy who is committed to these topics as well, and have check-in and debriefs. I emailed Kyle just a couple days ago with I just sent this email. Can you look through? I redacted it. I took all the important information out of it. And I wanted, to be able to get feedback, right? And then consider joining a coaching circle. There's going to be on the attendance form an option for you to click if you want to have some support or have another meeting. We don't know really what that will look like yet. If there is interest, we will build it. Feel like Field of Dreams. That's an old ass movie. If you build it, they will come. So if you want to keep your learning up, note that. And then finally, we're going to leave you with some resources that you all have at your leisure that will be clickable as well. So I'm going to put that in the chat. You have the attendance link, which we hope and expect you will click, as well as the link to the Google folder with some of the materials that not only we have referenced, but we will, that this presentation is in there as well, along with some of the deeper dives in the reading materials. Kyle, anything you'd add?
We might update the slides that are in that Google Drive. So, because there's a couple of changes and additions that we've made today. So just know that might look differently. So give us at least 24 hours before you start clicking around Google or trying to download stuff and save it and stuff like that. We're going to leave you with this. I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. Dr. Maya Angelou. And so I just thought about it. And so really want us to remember that we can only do with what we know. And as we continue to learn and grow, then we can always do better. And so we invite you on that journey with us. We can be a part of the solution. We can definitely make a difference in multiple ways. And so in our own sphere of influences, in our own little ways, in the one-on-one relationships that we have, it's imperative that we continue to center equity, inclusion, diversity, compassion, trust in those relationships, because it only makes our work easier. And the caveat to that is that it takes more time up front, but the payout in the end is that much better and richer. So we thank you for your time today. If there is nothing that Emily wants to put into this space.
I just want to thank you. I want to thank each person who is here, who's been able to stick it out. We know that 3 hours is a long time. We know that this has been a long week. For those of you, some of you have stuck it out through a number of workshops, maybe been at Kyle's at the beginning. And Kyle, thank you for sticking it out with us as well and dropping your knowledge and expertise and experience with us. It has been such a pleasure. And I've just learned so much during this week as well. So would love if others need to, I don't know, I feel like this is closure, right? This is odd because this is the end of our workshop series. And so while we didn't have a technical beginning and end to it, this is the last one. So I see some thanks and gratitude coming into the chat. If that's where you're comfortable doing it, wonderful. We love it when people will say goodbye on their way out of the Zoom room, and stick around if you have any comments and questions. But at this point, thank you so much.